and welcome back to the Jerry and Carol Harris Jewish Destiny series. I'm your host, Rabbi Pinchas Landis, and let's delve back into Jewish history. So last time we met, last week, we were talking about the tumultuous 14th century, and the tumultuous 14th century really just sets up the events of the 15th century. Now, quite often in Jewish history, we look at the most cataclysmic events and think like, in some way that was isolated, that was the worst thing that happened. But when we start to dig down under the surface, we realize that there was always an uptick and upbuild to these events, and the events were just the culmination. And that's when we get to talk about the Holocaust. The Holocaust was terrible. 6 million Jews being wiped out by Hitler, Yamach Shemo. But Hitler didn't come in a vacuum, and we're going to see that that was a result of so much underlying and overt anti-Semitism that had been just brewing under the surface in Eastern Europe that came to the top, came to its fruition, came to its boiling point during World War II. So the 15th century, in which we remember as the century when the Jews were finally expelled from Spain en masse, we remember that as a terrible cataclysmic event, which it was, but it was the culmination of a century and a half of terrible events, as we started discussing last time, and as we'll continue right now. So we left off last time with the massacres of 1391, which really we can mark that as the end of Spanish Jewry. Now, as we're going to see tonight, it'll take 100 years to play itself out, but the writing was clearly on the wall as of 1391. Now, the question that we always ask at this time, we asked it in modern times with the Holocaust, and we can ask it at this point with the terrible times in Spain. Like, why didn't the Jews just get out? Why didn't they go somewhere else? Why didn't they move on? Well, there's a lot of answers for that, one of which is, we're going to see this is a big theme in the time of the Spaniards and really throughout Jewish history, is, these aren't events that happen all at the same time. They build upon each other. You think that this will pass, this monarch or leader will be overthrown. When Hitler, Yamach Shemo, came to power in Germany, Jews were laughing. They thought his government wouldn't last 6 months. And, so at first you don't really want to believe the events that are unfolding in front of your eyes. And beyond that, you're dealing with people who've been in these places for a long time. They've been very comfortable there for a long time. So they want to be Murray Heter. They want to answer away for the situation and think it's not going to be so bad. So that's always a big backdrop for these situations, that even though the writing on the wall is clear to us, hindsight's always 20/20, and it's not always so clear when these events are happening, especially when you consider that this was long before social media, long before the modern news, the 24-hour news cycle, long before any of that. So to even piece together events and firmly assess what was going on was not always so simple. So that's one backdrop. And the other backdrop that we'll discuss is, well, where would they go? Because we're going to see that already at this point, Germany, France, and England had expelled their Jews, pretty much, either formally or informally. So those were out of the question. We're going to see that other places, there's other very inhospitable locations in the world at this time. So one of the things is, even if you do see the writing on the wall, well, where are you going to go? That was definitely the case in Eastern Europe. Jews ran away from Hitler in the 30s and went to Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is taken over by the Jews, by the Germans. They go on to Poland. Poland's taken over by the Germans. They go to Holland. Holland's taken over by... Where are you going to go? And that was definitely the problem with the Spanish Jews, with the Sephardic Jews, for sure at the end of the 14th century, when to us the writing on the wall was clear. But as the 15th century progresses and things get even worse, that is definitely the issue at hand that is going to be dealt with. So in so many ways, this is a negative time period. This is a time period that we like to forget, not the least of which is that first category that I just mentioned, those people who wanted to rationalize it away. They were comfortable. They wanted to keep their positions. This was the aristocracy, the wealthier class, and they're very much a part of the group that wants to make it work. And what will happen is many of them will convert to Catholicism, and some of them will do it by force. Some of them will do it initially wanting to be conversos, wanting to be hidden Jews, but just be Catholic externally. But that might have worked for them in, let's say, 1391, but by 1420, 1430, their kids are firmly Catholic at this point, and will really, a lot of them will become the leaders of the negative things that happen to the Jews. So what happens as we go into the 15th century is there is just a continued fervor, a continued desire to try and convert the Jews. And this was led almost exclusively by apostate Jews, by Jews who converted to Catholicism. Like, it wasn't enough for them to convert themselves, they had to try and, I guess, justify it by getting all the Jews to convert. And by the way, don't think these are just people, like nowadays we think of if a Jew would convert to Catholicism, they must have mental problems, there must be something wrong with them. It's a very strange time, and we like to forget these facts, but there were rabbis, there were even scholars who converted to Catholicism, and that's a very hard thing for us to wrap our heads around nowadays, and I don't have a good explanation for that. But it's those apostate Jews who really, in many ways, lead the war against the Jews, back against their former fellow co-religionists, at least at the beginning of the 15th century, and we'll see by the end of the 15th century, it'll be the descendants of the conversos, the descendants of the Jews that were forcibly converted. So there's nothing great that came out of the converso situation in any way, shape, or form. So what happens in the beginning of the 15th century is we have a monarch by the name of Henry III, and he is prompted by some famous apostates. Most notably, there was one by the name of Solomon Halevi was his Jewish name, Shlomo Halevi. His Catholic name is Paul de Burgos. And he had a student who also converted, a student first as a Jew and then followed him in conversion by the name of Yehoshua Larkey, whose Catholic name was Geronimo de Santa Fe. And the two of them, under the rulership of Henry III, are really the ones who formalized this anti-Semitism, formalized this fervor to try and get the Jews to convert. And they wrote something called the 24 Clauses, making a number of rules to basically, their goal was to make things so difficult for the Jews that they would for sure convert to Catholicism. Now, these 24 clauses included, they made it illegal for Jews to practice medicine, surgery, chemistry, or pharmacy. They made it illegal for Jews to deal in bread, wine, flour, meat, food, essentially. They made it illegal for Jews to practice handicrafts or any trade. Jews could not hold public office. Jews could not be money brokers or agents. There went the business of usury that Jews have been so prolific in for this time period. Jews could not have Catholic servants, farmhands, lamplighters, or grave diggers. A Jew could not eat, drink, or bathe with Catholics. They could not have any intimate conversation or, God forbid, sexual relations with Catholics. They could not be seen visiting Catholics or giving them presents. Catholic women, whether they were married or single, were forbidden to enter the Jewish neighborhood either day or night. The Jews had no jurisdiction whatsoever. They couldn't levy taxes just for their community. They couldn't raise money for communal support. Jews could not take the title Don, which was a title of authority and seniority in Spain at that time. They could not carry arms. They could not trim their beards or hair. Jewish women had to wear basically the equivalent of what we would call now a burqa, and even the men could not wear garments that were made out of a nice material. On the pain of losing all their property or even being put into slavery. They were forbidden to leave the country, and any knight who protected them was punished severely, had to pay huge fines. And any of these laws that were not followed by the Jews, tremendous fines were levied on the Jews who were caught in violation of any of these laws. Beyond this, it was forbidden to study the Talmud. It was forbidden for Jews to read anti-Catholic writings. It was forbidden for Jews to pronounce the name Jesus, Mary, Maria, as she's called in Spanish, or any of the saints. It was forbidden for Jews to manufacture any vessels that were used in the church. And it was forbidden for Jews to build new synagogues. Every community can only have one synagogue. They could not decorate the existing synagogues. And Jews were forbidden to bake or sell matzahs or to give them away. And they were not allowed to dispose of non-kosher meat. They were not allowed to disinherit their children who had been baptized, who had converted. So basically, if you have a parent and is upset because their children converted to Catholicism, they could not disown them. They still had to let them inherit whatever was theirs. They had to wear badges that identified them as Jews. And as I believe we mentioned last week, they had to listen to Catholic sermons in the synagogue. This was just a number of the laws that were made against the Jews. And they were made by Jews who had converted converted, and were trying to force other Jews to convert. So you can imagine how terrible the situation is. Now, once we start to think about what must have been like to live under these pressures, so the end of the century, you have tremendous massacres. Then a few decades later, you have all these laws being put into place. And we like to look at the situation and we see that the overwhelming majority of Sephardic Jewry does convert. Again, most of them, we can debate. We don't have any way of knowing how sincere their conversion was, but for sure within a few generations, it doesn't matter because their kids don't, for the most part, survive as Jews. And we can say, oh, that's ridiculous. I would definitely have stood up. I would have left. I would have fought. I would have done this. I would have done that. But as the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says, Al tidon al atzmecha ad al tidon el es chavercha ad shetigi bimkoma, that we should not judge our friends until we arrive in his place. And the way that I think we say this in English is, don't judge your friend till you've walked a mile in his shoes, because at that point you're a mile away and you've got his shoes. No, but seriously, for us to look back and judge someone who we haven't stood where they've stood is just not fair. So we can't really pass judgment of the people on this time. And from 1413 to 1415, there was a terrible event known as we mentioned many of these disputations that happened, and this was the worst of them. It was called the Disputation of Tortosa, lasted for almost 3 years, and off and on for 3 years, and it involved over 300 rabbis who were forced to come there, and shortly into it, the rabbis weren't even allowed to say anything. It was just the church preaching to them and saying whatever they wanted. One of the most famous rabbis to participate in the Disputation of Tortosa was Rav Yosef Albo, who wrote a very famous work of Jewish philosophy called Sefer Ikarim, the book of fundamentals of Judaism. And it was just this was like the culmination, the worst of all the disputations, because at least at the ones that happened before this, like the one that the Ramban had at Barcelona, where it was actually admitted that the Ramban won that disputation. Here, the Catholics just made up things. They would quote things that they said were put in the Talmud that were never there, and what could the Jews say? These apostate Jews would show pieces of paper to the antipope Benedict VIII, who was the one officiating, and it would be written in Hebrew, and they'd say, it says right here that the Jews crucified Jesus because he's really the Messiah, and they didn't want him to be the Messiah, or whatever it is, and the Jew couldn't say anything, and the Pope couldn't read the Aramaic, or the Hebrew letters, or whatever it was. So it was a terrible, terrible time of Jewish persecution, and again, just made a terrible situation even worse. The culmination of this terrible 15th century happens when two monarchs, one by the name of Ferdinand and one by the name of Isabella, marry in the year 1469, in so doing uniting their two empires, which are known as Aragon and Castile, which at that point made up basically 90%, 85-90% of what we today call Spain. And with that, they built a huge empire that really just sealed the deal for the ultimate expulsion and ultimate demise of the Jewish community of Spain. Now, initially, Ferdinand and Isabella actually protected the Jews. They were protective of the Jews. But shortly into their rule, they were very disturbed by reports, I assume levied by apostate Jews, but reports that many Jewish converts to Christianity did not do it sincerely, and in hiding they were still practicing their Judaism, which was a fact because that's what many were doing. Now, in the wake of this, they decided that something needed to be done. So they started something in 1478. They wrote to the Pope for a papal bull. That means the Pope statement of the Pope, a edict of the Pope, that they should be able to start the Holy Order of the Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition, the concept of an Inquisition, had been going on already since I believe the year 1100, 1200 in different parts of Christian Europe, and the purpose of an Inquisition was always to try to sniff out and stomp out heresy. So until this point, the focus had really been on just different heretical groups or heretical thoughts that had been coming up within the Christian world. And that's how the Inquisition, again, always under the guise of the church, but that's how it had been happening for the past several centuries throughout Christian Europe. Now, this one in Spain is different because the stated goal of the Inquisition was to basically keep an eye on the Jews who had converted to Catholicism and to make sure that that conversion was in fact sincere. So I just want to clarify terms here for a moment. For those of you who ever saw the great historical work, History of the World Part 1 by Mel Brooks, when they get up to the time period of that we're talking about right now, they have a song, The Inquisition, what a show, The Inquisition, and it basically describes the whole century and a half we've been talking about. So a lot of times we lump together this whole century and a half of very difficult times for Sephardic Jewry as the Spanish Inquisition, or we think that the Spanish Inquisition means the expelling of the Jews from Spain. That's not what it was. It was the final prelude before that happened, the penultimate step, we'll say, of Catholic Spain, and it was exactly what it means. An Inquisition was a tribunal, and Jews, converso Jews, were brought before the tribunal, and the tribunal would through their very fair and honest system of inquisition, like doing things like tying boulders to those being inquisited upon and throwing them into the water and saying if they miraculously rise to the top, they're sincere Christians, and if they sink to the bottom, then they were really closet Jews. Again, very fair and honest tactics. Now, the rationale was that even if somebody would even if their tactics were faulty and they would die under false pretense, well, at least then they go straight to heaven. So the church was looking as a win-win. Either we prove that they're honest Christians through miraculous means that weren't going to happen, or they'll die, but they would have died as a Christian martyr, really, and they'll go straight to heaven. So this is what played out during the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the Inquisition technically did not touch the at this point, probably around 100,000 Jews that remained sincere Jews. Now, they were persecuted by all those other clauses that we talked about. There's plenty to punish them, but the Inquisition was specifically the conversos, specifically the Jews that had converted to Christianity, and to make sure that that conversion was sincere. Now, if Jews had helped conversos in any way to hide their Judaism, they could also be punished by the Inquisition. But the focus was the Jews who converted to Catholicism. So here, these Jews thought that they were kind of saving their neck by converting, and again, some of them, unfortunately, it was a sincere conversion, yet there was much persecution specifically on these converts by the Inquisition. Now again, numbers in this time period are always hard, but numbers are anywhere from 10,000 to 50,000 of these converso Jews died at the hands of the Inquisition. Many more were tortured and had other fines and punishments levied against them. It was a terrible time for the converso Jews of Spain, or anyone who helped the converso Jews. So Ferdinand and Isabella write to the Pope in 1478 for a bull to start the Holy Order of the Spanish Inquisition. It officially started 5 years later in 1483. Now, the leader of the Inquisition, or the Grand Inquisitor, was a man by the name of Thomas de Torquemada, who was himself the descendant of conversos from the end of the 14th century, and he was a Dominican monk. He was the confessor of the king and the queen, in other words, the one they confessed to, and it was a pretty difficult situation, to say the least. He had a whole team of inquisitors, a very bloody time. Okay, fast forward to the last decade of the 15th century. So the Spanish Inquisition had been going on for about 9 years at this point, in 1492, and this was also several months after the fall of Granada. Now, Granada was like the last holdout of Muslim Spain. It was in the southern part of Spain, and that was the last holdout of Muslim Spain. And with Ferdinand and Isabella conquering Granada, in so doing, they now conquer the entirety of Spain. There's no more Muslim rulership anywhere in Spain. Now, for whatever reason, the Jews' reputation after the War of Granada was even worse than it was beforehand. So in the wake of the victory, and again, the Christians are feeling good about themselves. Now they have all of Spain. The Reconquista is completed. The reconquest of Spain is completed. So they're feeling pretty good about themselves. So what do? They decide to kick all the Jews out of Spain in something called the Alhambra Decree. So again, the Spanish Inquisition, that was to inquisite upon the conversos. The Alhambra Decree, that was the decree that kicked all the Jews out of Spain. Now, the stated goal of this decree was that, first of all, again, to help get the Jews to convert, because the choice was either convert, leave, or be killed. But beyond that, the reason why Ferdinand and Isabella said they could just let the Jews who didn't want to convert stay in Spain is because they felt that they were also having an influence on the conversos and encouraging them to come back to Judaism. So the decree, the Alhambra Decree, was put into effect March 31st, 1492, and the Jews are given 4 months to figure out where to go. And as we said before, part of the issue was where? Where are they going to go at this point? They can't go north, so to speak, because that's France, Germany, and England, or England's the islands. But so where are they going to go? And we'll discuss that in a minute, where they actually do end up going. Now, even though at this point, as we said, the Jews are stripped of almost everything, there were still, as we would say, b'chol zos, with all this going on, there was still a handful of Jews who held prominent positions in the court of Ferdinand and Isabella. And they were actually offered protection. They were offered protection by the king. King said they didn't have to go. And the 2 most famous of these Jews was one named Don Avraham Senor and another one named Don Isaac Abarbanel. Now, they were, let's discuss who they were. Don Avraham Senor was the last crowned rabbi of the Castile of the empire, and at the time of the expulsion edict in 1492, he was 80 years old. Not a young man. To live to be 80 in this time period was in and of itself a feat. So again, when I talk about not judging people and not saying, oh, how did a great rabbi and the last crowned rabbi, how did he do this? On top of everything else that we've discussed, he was 80 years old. So, again, put yourself in his shoes. But he chooses to convert and to stay in Spain. Now, the Catholics, and wanting to make it clear that this was a big win for them. Here, the chief rabbi, member of the court, he's converting to Catholicism, he's choosing to stay. They make a whole big pomp and circumstance. He converts publicly, and for the most part, we don't hear a lot from his family, but we're going to see parts of his family will get out of Spain, and as will many of the conversos, because when the Jews are kicked out in 1492, a lot of conversos take the opportunity to leave also, hoping that in other places they can practice free as Jews. And interestingly enough, Don Avraham Senor is a very famous Jewish descendant, a descendant of the conversos of his descendants, who outwardly practice Catholicism, inwardly still try to stay connected to Judaism. As they escaped to the New World, they were able to once again be Jews. And his famous descendant is Benjamin Nathan Cardoza, the Jewish Supreme Court Justice, who is a direct descendant of Don Avraham Senor. But unfortunately, for the most part, we don't have a lot of Jewish descendants from Don Avraham Senor. Don Isaac Abarbanel, on the other hand, himself had already led a very tumultuous life. His family was originally from Portugal. The family was originally from Spain and had escaped after the massacres of 1391. So they had already left Spain once. They went to Lisbon in Portugal, where the family had lived for the better part of the 15th century. In 1483, the family was accused of being part of a conspiracy. There was a coup d'etat, a change of the government, or an attempted coup d'etat, and the Abarbanel family, who was already involved in government in Portugal, was accused of being part of that. So the family in 1483 flees to Spain, to Castile, and in the next 9 years, the Abarbanel is able to reach high levels of government, but never forgets the fact that he is sincerely a Jew and that he has already fled from so much persecution. His family already left Spain once. They had to leave this difficult situation in Portugal, and he never forgets it. Now, just in comparison to the situation, he was 55 at the time, a lot younger than Don Avraham Senor. Now, many are of the opinion that it was actually the Abarbanel's idea for Columbus's voyage, which we're going to get to in a minute, and that he actually financed a large portion of it out of his own funds. Now, in 1492, when the Abarbanel hears about the Alhambra Decree that the Jews should be expelled, he actually tries to bribe the king from his own funds, and it seems like the bribe was strong enough that the king was actually crucifying it. At which time, Thomas of Torquemada overheard that the Abarbanel was trying to bribe the king to overthrow or to undo the Alhambra Decree, and Torquemada comes in with a big cross and he throws it on the floor and he says, "What, are you going to crucify him a second time for money like Judas Iscariot did?" And with that, the king was inspired, and he said to Abarbanel, "Sorry, can't listen to you, but even though we're kicking out the Jews, we can still use you here, and you don't even have to convert." Abarbanel said, "I'm not staying because I need a minyan. I need a minyan of Jews to pray with." He said, "Fine, keep a minyan of Jews, we'll protect them, you can have a shul, and you can stay." But the Abarbanel said the fateful words of the Isha Shunamis in Tanakh, Besoch Ami Ani Yosheves, that I dwell with my people, and he took the choice of being expelled, of leaving Spain in 1492, which he did. Now, what happens in the immediate expulsion, roughly 100,000 left. Those are the numbers that we assume actually stayed sincere as Jews and tried to leave Spain. Now, one of the places that a lot of the Jews go is Portugal, because it's right there. It's right next to Spain. But that doesn't last very long, because the Jews are going to be expelled from there in 1496. And Abarbanel was one of them. Abarbanel first went with the Jews to Portugal, expelled 4 years later. So at this point, just if you're keeping score, he had already fled, or the family had fled from Spain. They had to flee from Portugal back to Spain. They went from Spain back to Portugal, and now they have to run from Portugal, where he runs to Italy. And we're going to see there's many expulsions throughout Italy, but he will finally live out the rest of his life in Venice. Now, from this point on, he's always involved in government everywhere he goes, but he also is a very prolific writer of Torah thoughts. He's known as a tremendous Torah scholar, and he wrote a famous commentary on Tanakh that is in every Tanakh Mikros Gedolos that you can buy today, and is considered one of the main commentaries that we have on our Tanakh. But he definitely wrote towards the end of his life. He said, all the government work here, I thought I was trying to do good for the Jews, and in the end, it was worth nothing. I should have spent my whole life as a scholar, and I would have achieved so much more. Now, he achieved a lot, but he's saying he could have achieved so much more. So roughly 100,000 Jews choose to leave Spain. Now, by the way, this is one of the reasons why, one of the numerous reasons why today, when we look at the breakdown of Sephardim and Ashkenazim, that Ashkenazim so outnumber the Sephardim, because all the Sephardim that are alive today came from only those 100,000 who tried to leave, and we're going to see that many of them end up in Ashkenazi communities and end up taking on the customs of the local Ashkenazi communities that they end up fleeing to. Now, to focus on this idea of, as I said before, why didn't they leave sooner? Why didn't they get out? It's because now that they had to go, where did they go? So we know that from the 13th to the 16th century, during this time period, there were at least 15 European countries who had already expelled the Jews before this point of 1492, and there were at least 5 others that will expel the Jews after 1492, Portugal being one of them. So this question of where do you go was just so difficult. Now, Italy attracted a lot of Jews, and because even though Italy was the home of it was the papal state, the home of the Vatican, the home of one of the popes, because this is a time period where we have all these multiple popes switching, the pope, the anti-pope, but the country in and of itself was in a state of political chaos, and there were a lot of small city-states. So even though a lot of them, for example, Sicily will expel the Jews the same day as Spain, and the Jews, even when they go to Italy, they might have to run around. They might have to run around a little bit, but within Italy, they can go to the different small city-states, and in certain ones gain a certain amount of freedom. So we're going to see there's going to be a pretty large and substantial Italian Jewish community that'll develop, and the influence in Italy at this point was really Ashkenazi. So Italian Jews really have their own set of customs until this day. If you look in the Chumashim quite often by the Haftarahs, it'll tell you all the different customs of Haftarahs. The Sephardic community reads it like this. The Ashkenazi Ashkenazi community reads it like this, and quite often it'll tell you a different custom for your Italian Jewish community, for the Italian Jewish community, because they kind of develop their own community. But Italy becomes a place of refuge. At least certain city-states within Italy becomes a place of refuge for a lot of Jews, and the Abarbanel himself finally settles in Venice, and that is where he dies. Another place that the Jews find solace is in the Netherlands, and in Amsterdam, most specifically. Now, at this point, the Netherlands was newly independent. It was known as being a very tolerant place, and it really was. The Jews that make it to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam, pretty much will live, for the most part, unmolested until the Nazis, when, unfortunately, the Netherlands will fall under control of the Nazis. But it'll become a great Jewish community. It'll become a great and wealthy country in and of itself. And a lot of the credit of that will be due to the Jews. The famous Dutch India Trade Company and all these different companies that build in the wealth of Amsterdam and the wealth of the Netherlands and the wealth of Holland, that a lot of that will be attributed to the Jews who end up moving to Holland, to the Netherlands. Another place where we see a Jewish population come for the first time is the Greek Isles and that area of the country, Turkey, Greece, Salonika over there, Rhodes, all those different places, and again, very distinct communities, very distinct Sephardic communities that will develop and will grow out of that place. If you go to Seattle, Washington, there is a Sephardic community there. There's a synagogue there called Sephardic Bikur Holim, and that is a descendant of the Rhodes community, of this Greek Sephardic community. And here in Cleveland, we have the Cleveland Sephardic Synagogue, where the rabbi is Rabbi Tzvi Maimon. And Rabbi Tzvi Maimon is, first of all, a direct descendant of Moshe ben Maimon, of the Rambam. But his family comes from after they left Spain, they went to this area of Greece and Rhodes. And his grandfather is actually the rabbi in Seattle, in the Sephardic community in Seattle. So, if you will, even though the Sephardic congregation of Cleveland is made up of a hodgepodge of Mizrahi Jews, the rabbi at least is from the community of Rhodes. North Africa, which the Jews had left North Africa because of the radical Muslims that had taken it over and gone back to Spain. Well, Jews will once again go to North Africa. And North Africa will be rebuilt at this point by Jews. The communities of Morocco, Algeria, Tunis, and even Egypt, and will be basically, again, they'll be thriving communities and be basically unmolested until 1950, until almost 500 years later, when, after, in the wake of the modern day state of Israel, all Muslim countries and all countries in the Arab League will expel their Jews, and the Jews of Tunis, of Algeria, of Yemen, of Egypt will all be expelled and will end up going to Israel. Parenthetically, at the time, and for sure when he became prime minister, Begin, when he would talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict, he would say, we just had to do a population exchange. You already kicked the Jews out of all your countries, and we had to absorb them here in the country. Now, please take these Arabs that are here and put them in your country in place of the Jews. That obviously never played out, and we can't even suggest such a thing nowadays, but that's what Begin said at the time. And we'll get to Begin eventually. We'll spend plenty of time on Begin. And the last place that the Jews go to, again, just a small number, maybe a few hundred, but a few hundred make their way to Israel. So, as we mentioned when we talked about the Ramban 200 years earlier, there were very few Jews left in Israel after the Crusades, and we're going to see a few hundred who will come here after the expulsion of Spain, but those few hundred Jews will build very sizable communities, most notably in Yerushalayim and Jerusalem and Tzfas and Safed, whatever you call it. And it'll actually, this group of Sephardic Jews who we'll get to probably next week will be the first Jews to put Tzfat on the map of Jewish history. So when we talk about Israel, we talk about four holy cities of four holy cities of Israel, and they are Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberia, and Tzfas. Jerusalem, for obvious reasons, it's the capital. It was Beis Hamikdash. It's been the eternal capital. Hebron, because that's where the patriarchs are buried. Tiberia, because that was one of the last stops of the Jews before they left Israel after all of the Roman wars. And Tzfat, because as the Jews come to repopulate Israel in this time period, there's going to be tremendous scholarship in Tzfat. In that mountain town in the north of Israel, there's going to be tremendous scholarship. And we'll get to who was there and what they achieved, hopefully next week. Now, at this point, is the Sephardic Jews tried to settle, and wherever they settled, it was not only the Jews who stayed sincerely Jewish and never converted, but even a lot of the conversos come along too. And even though all the rabbis at the time said the conversos should be reaccepted in the Jewish community, as we mentioned before, there was a lot of animosity of the Jews who really suffered the persecution at the hands of the government, and now all of a sudden this guy wants to come and be Jewish again and get shlishi in the synagogue, and why do you deserve it? Look at what you did. So there's definitely a lot of friction between the conversos who try and get reaccepted into the Sephardic communities now in exile from Spain, and it's going to take a while for the emotions, the raw emotions of that to be mollified, to be pacified, and there's actually going to be a signature that is going to develop amongst the Sephardim who never converted, and that is Samech Tet. And you'll see it until this day. A lot of times by books that were written by Sephardic Jews, they'll sign their name, whatever the name is, Samech Tet. Samech Tet in Hebrew stands for Sephardi Tahor, pure Sephardi. Now, that does not just mean that their lineage is purely Sephardi, meaning only it's been Sephardi marrying Sephardi generation after generation, but what it really means is the family is not a descendant of conversos. They stayed purely Jewish the whole time. And that really exists until this day. You'll see Sephardim write their name, Samech Tet. In fact, I think the Maimon family writes their name and signs their name with a Samech Tet afterwards. Okay. The other major event that happens in 1492 is Columbus sails the ocean blue. Now, it's the expulsion of the Alhambra Decree is one of the tragedies that we mourn on Tisha B'Av. It's, again, Tisha B'Av rearing its ugly face once again, because that was the day when the Jews had to be out of Spain by. Interestingly enough, it seems that Columbus left Spain, or intended to also leave Spain on Tisha B'Av of 1492, and he writes in his captain's log that he actually had to leave very late in the day because the Port of Palos was so cluttered with ships taking the Jews out of Spain. And this is one of the many facts of history that raises the question as to whether or not Christopher Columbus was Jewish. Now, it seems for sure that he was at the very least a descendant of conversos. That seems to be the case beyond a shadow of a doubt. But the question is whether or not he was a Jew himself. Now, one thing we also know for a fact is on his ships, the Nina Pinta and the Santa Maria, there were definitely Jews escaping Spain, because part of that question of where do you go? Some said, okay, we'll go on an exploration for the New World. Why not? What else do we have to lose? So there were for sure at least Jews on the ship, and but there's been a question for just generations what his lineage was. Now, Columbus himself, part of the question comes from the fact that Columbus himself was very cryptic, very quiet about his lineage. Never told it clearly to Ferdinand and Isabella, never told it clearly to anyone, never wrote it down. Similar to Esther, told by Mordechai not to say your lineage. And there are at least, for the past 5 centuries, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Italian, and even the Scottish have claimed ownership of Christopher Columbus. But it seems that there's what to rely upon that he might have himself been Jewish. First of all, as we mentioned before, the mission, while Ferdinand and Isabella get credit for it, it was Jews who financed the mission, probably for the most part out of their old funds. We mentioned already Don Isaac of Barbanel gave of his own money for the mission, and there are several other wealthy converso Jews who contributed heavily to the mission. Now, Columbus's stated mission for the exploration of the New World was to be able to spread the gospel. That's what he told Ferdinand and Isabella. But Simon Wiesenthal, who is one of the proponents that Columbus was in fact Jewish, says that he was trying to find a place for the Jews to go because there's nowhere else for the Jews to go. Now, there is those who speculate that Columbus's log, which is very hard to decipher because the Spanish doesn't seem like the Spanish that was spoken at the time. So there are those who claim it was actually the dialect of Ladino, which is like the Spanish, the Jewish Spanish, similar to Yiddish is a Jewish German language. It was the Spanish Jewish language of Ladino that Columbus wrote his letters in. And he seems to write a little monogram on the top of his letters. I have one example here. We'll put it up on the screen. And there are those who claim that these letters are Beis Hey, which traditionally Jews write on the top of letters on the type of documents to stand for Be'ezras Hashem, with the help of God, that whatever's in this letter or the document should happen with the help of God. And many claim that that's a Beis Hey. I don't know, not so sure about it myself, but many claim that that's what it is. And interestingly enough, that this is seen on the top of many of the letters and the documents we have from Columbus, but it is not on any of the letters that we have. We have 13 letters that he wrote back and forth, or at least they sent to Ferdinand and Isabella, to his patrons, and none of them have this monogram, this potential Beis Hey on the top of it. So, was he Jewish? Was he not? I don't know, but there are definitely those who speculate that he was trying to discover a new world for the Jews to settle in. And initially, and ultimately, 400 centuries later, it is the place where most of the Jews in the world end up settling, as Europe will really completely, at least Eastern Europe, will completely turn its lights out on the Jews. So that is the negative, sad 15th century with the expulsion of the Jews, and I would like to say it can only get better from here, and we will see some bright times ahead, but this is the Edict of the Expulsion, the Alhambra Decree, the Spanish Inquisition, that comes to its ugly head in 1492. Now, interestingly enough, the Inquisition is going to follow Christian Europe all over the world. As Columbus comes to the New World, the Inquisition will come too. We're going to see that Jews who initially come to South America with Columbus will flee up to North America because they're afraid of the Inquisition, and the expulsion, the Alhambra Decree, will not even be rescinded, will not even be officially taken off the books of Spain until 1968. So very dark times that last for a very long time, and yet it is a very important part of our history, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of such negative history, but hey, we got to learn from our past so we don't make the same mistakes in the future. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to thank you for listening, and I'll look forward to joining again with you next week as we talk about the 16th century, the Renaissance, the printing press, and the initial rebuilding of the Jews in Israel. Have a wonderful week.